Hello everyone, it's great to see you all. Today I'm going to give the talk on anxiety and trauma and how that relates to the incessant chatter that we might have in our minds. So we've probably all experienced this kind of endless narrative that the mind produces. I often call it chatter. And it does cause anxiety directly. And we need the mind, of course, but it's not healthy if it's going nonstop. And I mean, you all know this, right? I'm not telling you something you haven't already experienced as a human being. Is this how the mind can go nonstop? So the practice is not about trying to get rid of constant thinking, that incessant chatter of the mind, or the anxiety that results from it. So we're not trying to get rid of any of that, but rather how to transform this into a path of awakening. Of course, along the way we experience the end of suffering. That's the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. There's a cause of our suffering, of our anxiety and stress, and there's a path, there's a way to ending that, and there's a path towards that. So the end of suffering and the path of awakening are very much interlinked. So rather than trying to get rid of it, we use it. We use it, right? We use it as opportunities to practice, really. I always ask the question, has anyone ever attained awakening during the course of an easy and comfortable life? So you can look at these little anxious moments and these difficult, maybe even painful moments in our lives as opportunities to awaken and to see how we cause suffering, so that it can cease. So most often, I think we feel anxiety because we're constantly trying to arrange life so that it's comfortable and pleasant, right? We spend so much of our time trying to arrange things just so. But it doesn't work. We can't. The flow just keeps flowing. We're in the flow. We're in the flow. We are the flow. So we experience constant frustration and anxiety. We want to control things, but we can't. And so we feel frustration, right? That's natural. I mean, something I often always say is, if you think that you can control life, then of course you're going to suffer. They just go hand in hand. I used to say, if you think you can control life, then it is your fault that you suffer. That's a little harsh, but in a way it is, right? It's this belief system that we've attached to. So if our highest aspiration is awakening, right, then we can transform the mind so that it becomes a source of happiness rather than a source of anxiety. We spoke about this in another session, or really figuring out what is your most important thing. What is your deepest aspiration? When we can touch into that, our adversity, our difficulties become foundational to our practice rather than something to be, avoided, or something that we have to try to control life to avoid. And the key to this kind of practice is to be firmly established that awakening is our highest aspiration or our most important thing. That's really fundamental to being able to do this. right? Because it takes tremendous courage to embark on this kind of practice. So it has to be something that's fundamentally important to us. And once this is firmly established as our most important thing, then we're more likely to see adversities and difficulties as opportunities to practice. So you can see how that relates. Now, I'm not talking about situational stress that we might face by challenging ourselves in our life, kind of the dukkha dukkha, as the Buddha called it. For example, you might feel stress in the body when you're about to speak in public. Or you might feel it just before a sports competition. And this is quite normal, and this is not what I'm speaking about here. The kind of situational, everyday stress that are kind of, I guess, natural manifestations of stress in the relative world, and they don't cease. And we all experience this, right? This kind of everyday stress. And it can actually be helpful in motivating us and moving us towards doing actions in the relative world. I just spent the weekend dragon boat racing in Montreal, and of course it was very competitive, and you're at the start line and you can feel all the energy, coursing through the body, and the, I guess, adrenaline or whatever things get put into the body to prepare. And I was just kind of noticing, thinking, oh, this is just a natural, the body just getting ready, because it knows, well, it knows when I'm sitting in this little seat with this paddle in my hand and I'm like this, that something is about to happen that's going to put tremendous stress on the body, so that it gets ready. And this is all quite natural, and helps me to paddle perhaps better. But if I'm sitting in the boat and going, oh geez, did I train enough? Oh shit, I ate fatty foods last night, and I remember the coach saying, never eat fatty foods the night before a race, I think I had some spicy food too. I'm not supposed to. Oh, this is going to be, you could just see the suffering that would be created, and then of course the performance would be affected as well. So it's the second part that I'm really talking about, not this kind of natural, situational, everyday stress that we get. So I'm really focusing here on what you can call unnecessary or optional anxiety that we create in our minds. And I would guesstimate this is about 90% of our overall anxiety. Do a little count for yourself through the day. I mean, this can keep you very focused on your attention on sort of what stressors are arising. Just see how much of it is just kind of naturally arising, and how much of it is unnecessary and mind created. Again, in previous sessions, I've kind of outlined a 3-step process to awakening, where we move from identification with the egoic mind, so with our thoughts, to identification with the witness, which is kind of that intermediary step 2, and eventually to non-identification, not with the egoic self or the witnessing self, but a non-identification and a just resting as awareness. The second step alone can dissolve anxiety. Very powerful. The second step, regardless of whether awakening unfolds in your life, the second step alone will dissolve anxiety and bring about real bliss in your life. When we take the perspective of the witness, we can simply observe the thoughts without pushing them away, without taking any interest in them. That's taking the witness perspective, or simply seeing thoughts arise without identifying with them. It sounds so simple, but it's a very powerful practice. And when you don't identify with your thoughts, we touch into the limitless and infinite true nature. We're this close to that infinite, our infinite true nature. I remember years ago when I began observing my thoughts on a real consistent basis, I would actually find myself laughing out loud at the absurdity of what the mind produced. It would say things like, "Oh, you're not good enough," or "You really screwed up when you did that," or all kinds of nonsense. It was all very judgmental and self-critical in many ways. And I started noticing that the vast majority of my thoughts were just nonsense, irrational, not helpful. So when we engage the witness in this way on a consistent basis, we see that, and it's good to have a sense of humor as well as you watch the mind. Remember Joseph Goldstein just ended a retreat, and I was walking with him, and he said, we were just walking quietly because it was the end of a retreat. We'd broken silence, and he just looked over and he says, "The mind has no pride." that just kind of sums it up. It's just spewing out nonsense and judgments and so on. So it's good to have a sense of humor as you're watching this, observing this. An important recognition is to see how the ego's self-centeredness plays into our reactions to anxiety, to any discomfort, any difficulty, really. We only experience difficulties as anxiety, right? We'll all have difficulties in our life, but we only experience them as anxiety because of our egoic self-centeredness. Our self-centeredness makes us unable to bear other people's behavior. It makes us unable to bear our own difficulties, our own discomfort. Right? We experience anxiety when we believe that things should not have happened the way they did. The practice is to acknowledge that this is just what the mind thinks. It's not what's happening. And once you begin to practice in this way, your entire life becomes your practice. So the key to this kind of practice is to kind of break free from the voice in your head. It involves letting go of thinking, or as it's often said, non-identification, non-attachment is another way to put it, with thoughts. I realize this takes tremendous courage to approach and allow all our difficulties and challenges, right? Moving into approaching, moving toward and allowing difficulties, even painful emotions, to allow them as they unfold without the filter of the mind and the stories of the mind. It takes tremendous courage. And I think that's why I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, that it's foundational to know that, to realize that awakening is what's most important, your deepest aspiration. So we see, as we observe in this way, that we see that our psychological suffering, our anxiety, comes about due to our resistance to what is or what was. Or in other words, believing the mind's stories about what is, or what was, or what may be. Right? It's all about believing these stories. We live from a belief structure, and the result is always anxiety. It can't be any other way. So when you hear the mind say it should be this way, or it shouldn't have happened this way, this is a warning sign or a kind of mindfulness bell that you're entering illusion. You're stepping towards anxiety. Shoulds or shouldn'ts are an argument with reality, and reality will always win. You can only experience frustration and anxiety when you argue with reality. The image, as I was preparing for this, the image of the standing by a river and watching the flow of the river, for me it was symbolic of this. And as opposed to, and I just pictured myself, running around in the river trying to control the water and, run after things that look like, they might be interesting, that might be floating by, and, just arguing with the way the river was flowing. It just occurred to me a story. I can't remember where I heard this, but it's just a story that a Zen story, I believe, of a fellow who went to a retreat, and he was in meditating in the little rooms, and he went to the Zen master and said, "The people here are really annoying me. I can't meditate in this building. Everybody's just driving me crazy. There's people's clocks ticking, and I can hear rustling, and it's just, I can't do it. Do you have another place where I can go meditate?" So the Zen master kind of understood. So he found him a cabin out, separate from the rest, out in the woods, and kind of a little yurt and by a beautiful stream. And he left him there, and he came back in the afternoon, and the fellow was in the stream rearranging the rocks. And the Zen master, "So what are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I didn't like the way the way the water was flowing over the rocks, so I'm trying to rearrange them so that so that I like the sound of the rocks, of the water going over the rocks." I think maybe that's where I got the image of the river. It just occurred to me, because I've heard that story before. And it really points to this, struggling with reality, trying to control the flow, and only experiencing anxiety and frustration. So we cannot argue with reality and feel better, even though the mind may tell us this. You just can't. Yeah, you just can't. When we allow it all in, then we can work with what's arising in the present moment. Right? We can respond to what's arising in the present moment with wisdom, with compassion. I remember another teacher saying, another way to approach it is to think of anxiety as something that you chose. Right? This releases any resistance. Think of it as something that you chose. Some of us may face deep patterns of trauma that keep repeating themselves. People that have childhood wounds, for example, or have experienced traumatic events. And the mind's quick in peace with folks that suffer in this way. They jump into thoughts thinking that, I have to control life to not feel this anxiety. And the ego's doing this because it believes that this is the way to keep the organism safe and secure. right? Is to protect to protect the entity, this organism. And it could, as I said, be due to childhood wounds that are kind of fueling an unconscious belief system. So the practice here, it's the same. It's to look deeply at what thoughts are being believed. Right? And this is not psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. It's much, much simpler than that. It's looking to see what is being believed and what is out of harmony with what is. What is being believed and what is out of harmony with what is. We can see the belief, and we can see that the belief has no truth. It's just a mind-made mirage. The conditioned self must see this again and again, that the believed thought is not true. I'm going to quote Byron Katie. A thought is harmless unless we believe it. It's not our thoughts, but the attachment to our thoughts that causes suffering. Attaching to a thought means believing that it's true without inquiring. A belief is a thought that we've been attached to, often for years. From Byron Katie. And she, of course, has the 4 steps to inquiring around thoughts. Is it true? Is it absolutely true? Who would I be if it wasn't true? And so on. So you could kind of look at it as a 2 kind of step process. The first is noticing the believed thought that fuels anxiety. And the second is sensing into where the anxiety is in the body. So what's the believed thought, number 1, and where is this anxiety manifesting in the body? Just keep it that simple. Keep asking the question, is this true? You notice a difficult or powerful emotion. Perhaps it's anxiety or fear. In that moment, you can look and see what is the believed thought that's fueling, that's behind this arising, this emotion that's arising. What's the believed thought? And you can usually, you can usually point right at it. As you practice this more and more, you can drill right down and say, oh, there's the believed thought. There it is, right there. Is it true? Is it absolutely true? And then in the next moment, you can feel into the body and know where the emotion is being manifested concretely in the body. And as we practice this over and over, right? It's a process of the conditioned mind seeing this again and again. We discover that we can see and we can feel anxiety. We can know anxiety and not be an anxious person. It's no longer personal. The anxiety feels less personal. It's no longer my anxiety. It's anxiety that's arising, like in the flow. There's a little anxiety log going down the river. And there it is. There goes the anxiety log. So we're witnessing the anxiety. In this kind of river edge awareness. So we can see that anxiety is a collection of thoughts and sensations, like stuff floating down the river or clouds floating through the sky without any inherent reality. And the only way to see this is to allow and open to anxiety and experiencing it, rather than trying to deny or avoid it. It's only by doing that that the years and years of conditioning and habit patterns and unhealed wounds can unravel and disentangle as we stop identifying with our thoughts and stories and begin to live our lives as they are, rather than how we think they should be. And so when we experience anxiety or any challenging emotion or physical pain, we can perceive it as integral to the process of purification and the disillusionment of the ego. You can see it all as integral to the falling away of the ego. They can be seen as catalysts for transformation, opportunities to practice. Michael Taft's statement points to this: let everything burn up in the fire of awareness. So if we're conscious or aware, it burns up. And that really encapsulates the idea of emotions that are fully allowed, can really illuminate. The metaphor of the fire really is often used by the Buddha, kind of represents the intense and transformative power of awareness. So it's like fire, it has the capacity to burn away illusions, to burn away conditioning, to burn away attachments, all these things that constitute what we call the egoic mind. So instead of turning away or avoiding, we turn towards them with full awareness, fully conscious. Hold it in awareness.